I never thought selling my yacht would land me in the middle of a federal investigation, but that's exactly what happened. I live in a quiet lakeside neighborhood, the kind of place where everyone pretends to be friendly until the HOA president shows up with a clipboard and an ego the size of Texas. Her name Olivia Whitmore, but everyone calls her Karen. She runs the HOA like a dictatorship. Every blade of grass, every mailbox, every drop of water has to get her approval. So when I decided to sell my $2.5 million yacht, my pride and joy, she completely lost it. Within an hour, she was screaming at the dock, waving her phone and calling 911, claiming I was laundering money through an illegal sale on HOA property. Next thing I know, police cruisers were pulling up neighbors filming, and my phone was blowing up with notifications from the HOA Facebook group. And that was just the beginning, because what they found out later changed everything. Before we dive into this wild HOA drama, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is, and don't forget to subscribe for more insane HOA stories like this one. When the police arrived, it looked like something out of a crime show, flashing red and blue lights, reflecting off the calm surface of the lake, neighbors standing on their porches whispering, and Karen in her pink blazer pacing back and forth, like a courtroom attorney waiting for her big moment. She pointed straight at me and yelled, "That man is selling HOA property without authorization. He's committing fraud." The two officers exchanged glances, clearly confused. One of them, Officer Barnes, tried to calm her down. "Ma'am, can you explain exactly what was sold?" "My yacht," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Correction, my yacht, my dock, and my land." Karen scoffed so hard I thought her pearls might pop off her neck. "That dock belongs to the HOA. He's using our facilities for personal profit. This is embezzlement." I took a deep breath and pulled a thick folder from my truck. I'd learned long ago that living in this HOA meant always having receipts. Actually, the dock is on parcel 34B private property, built in 1998 before this HOA even existed. I've got the land survey and title deed right here. Barnes flipped through the documents while his partner took photos of the scene. "Looks pretty clear to me," he said finally. "Mr. Thompson, you're within your rights. There's no crime here." Karen's face turned a shade of red I didn't know human skin could reach. "No crime? Are you blind? He's running an illegal business. He's selling a yacht worth millions. Where do you think that money's going, huh? Offshore accounts." The officer sighed. "Ma'am, we can't arrest someone because you think he's rich." But Karen wasn't done. Oh no. She whipped out her phone and started live streaming to the HOA Facebook group. "Attention residents of Clearwater Estates," she declared dramatically. "We have a serious financial crime happening right now on our property. I've called the police. Don't worry, I'll make sure justice is served." Hundreds of comments poured in instantly. Some of my neighbors typed things like, "What's happening?" while others posted angry emojis. My phone buzzed nonstop. My wife texted, "What on earth did you do now?" I wanted to laugh, but then I noticed one of the officers quietly taking notes. Barnes cleared his throat. "Sir, we'll need to keep a copy of these documents just to verify with the county registry." "No problem," I said, handing them over. "You'll see everything's legit." Karen smirked. "Oh, I'll make sure of that. I'll be contacting the county commissioner myself. I have connections." She always said that I have connections. The only connection she really had was a cousin who worked part-time at a city permit office and a gossip line that could reach every resident in under 10 minutes. As the police left, Karen marched over to me, her heels stabbing into the dock with every step. "You think you're so clever, don't you, selling your fancy boat and thinking you're above the rules?" "Olivia," I said calmly, "I followed every rule in that 120-page HOA handbook you shoved under my door last Christmas. Selling my yacht isn't against any of them." She crossed her arms. "We'll see about that." I watched her storm off, muttering something about calling the district attorney. I could have ignored it. I could have laughed it off. But something about her reaction felt too extreme. Why did she care so much about a private sale between me and a broker from Miami? Why was she acting like my transaction was a threat to her personally? That night, after things settled down, I got an email from my yacht broker. "Hey Brian, strange thing, the HOA president contacted the buyer and told him the sale is under federal review. He's getting nervous, wants to delay." I clenched my jaw. She wasn't just causing drama, she was interfering with a legal sale. That could cost me hundreds of thousands in lost time and fees. I sat down at my desk, opened my safe, and pulled out the complete HOA file I'd been keeping for years. Every fee, every renovation fund, every special assessment that had mysteriously gone over budget. I started flipping through receipts, and that's when something caught my eye. A $48,000 dock renovation fund from 3 years ago. According to the HOA minutes, that project was supposed to improve lighting and security on the docks, except No such work had ever been done. I remembered because I'd personally fixed a broken light pole myself. The check had been written to a company called Blue Harbor Services, LLC. Out of curiosity, I searched the name online. The company address APO Box. The registered agent Daniel Whitmore. Karen's husband. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," I whispered. Suddenly, all the pieces started fitting together. Karen's obsession with controlling the docks, her paranoia about money, her constant need to approve every repair. She wasn't protecting the HOA, she was protecting herself. I forwarded the information to my lawyer the next morning. His reply came within minutes. "Brian, this looks bad for her, but we'll need more than one transaction to make a case. Keep digging. Fine by me." Over the next week, I quietly started collecting everything I could. Copies of the HOA budget, screenshots of financial statements, payment trails, old newsletters, even her Facebook posts bragging about fundraising projects. Meanwhile, Karen's campaign against me went into overdrive. She printed flyers claiming I was under federal scrutiny for financial misconduct and hand-delivered them to every doorstep. She even tried to get me banned from using the community clubhouse. At the next HOA meeting, she tried to humiliate me in front of everyone. Standing at the podium, she said, "Mr. Thompson's sale of his yacht has raised serious ethical concerns. We must protect our community from unsavory financial dealings." I raised my hand. "Are you implying I'm a criminal, Olivia?" She smirked. "If the shoe fits," the crowd murmured. A few people looked uncomfortable. One man, Greg, from across the street, whispered, "Karen, maybe you're going too far." Her eyes narrowed. "Excuse me, Brian's lived here for 10 years, Greg said. "He's always paid his dues on time. Maybe we should see some transparency from you instead of attacking him." That shut her up for about 5 seconds before she launched into another rant about protecting property values. But for the first time, I saw something shift in the room. People were starting to doubt her. After the meeting, Greg approached me. "She's been taking money from the HOA fund for years," he whispered. "My cousin used to do maintenance work here. She never paid him, said the budget was frozen, but somehow she bought a new Mercedes last spring." I nodded slowly. "That matches what I've found so far." He handed me a flash drive. "You didn't get this from me. It's from the maintenance contractor's invoices. There's stuff on there you'll want to see." That night I plugged it into my laptop. Inside was a folder full of scanned receipts, fake ones, same handwriting, different signatures, duplicate payments to Blue Harbor Services. By midnight, I had a 20-page document ready. Evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and possibly tax evasion. Karen had tried to destroy me with false accusations, but she just handed me the rope that might hang her entire empire. I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window toward the still water where my yacht, once Saturday, its reflection shimmered under the moonlight. I smiled to myself. "If she wants a fight," I said quietly, "she's about to get one in federal court." By the next morning, I'd already called my lawyer, David Holbrook, a no-nonsense maritime attorney who used to work for the State Tax Bureau before switching to private practice. When I told him what was happening, he gave a low whistle. "Brian, sounds like your HOA president's been dipping her hands in more than just the community garden," he said. "If she interfered with your sale, and there's fraud involved, this could get big, really big." We agreed to meet at his downtown office that afternoon. I brought everything, the HOA statements, my property deeds, the invoices from the flash drive, even printouts from the HOA's Facebook group where Karen had posted her live stream calling me a criminal. David spread the papers across his desk like a chessboard. "All right," he said, tapping his pen. "First, we'll protect you. I'll draft a formal cease and desist letter demanding the HOA retract those accusations publicly. Then we'll request a financial transparency audit from the county clerk. Every HOA that handles public or community funds has to file annual expense reports. If she skipped that step, she's toast," I finished. He smiled. "Exactly. But as I left his office, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was about more than just a petty HOA feud. The deeper I looked, the stranger it became. That evening, I received an anonymous email from someone using the address dockworker47@protonmail.com. "You don't know me, but I used to work for the Clearwater HOA maintenance crew. Watch your back. Karen's hiding things you wouldn't believe. She's got friends at City Hall keeping her safe. And she knows you're looking." I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. Friends at City Hall, I started digging again, this time focusing on public grant records. A few clicks later, I found something shocking. The HOA had received a $1.2 million grant from the city's Infrastructure Improvement Fund 2 years ago. The purpose renovation and safety upgrades for community dock and boat access. Except those upgrades never happened. Not one. I remembered the potholes near the dock entrance, the flickering security lights, the rusty ladders that hadn't been replaced in decades. So where did the money go? The grant paperwork listed the contractor as once again Blue Harbor Services, LLC. I double-checked the corporate registry, Daniel Whitmore, her husband. I sat back in my chair and let out a bitter laugh. Of course. By the next day, David had already sent formal notices to the HOA, demanding transparency. Karen predictably went nuclear. She called me around noon, her voice sharp and trembling with fury. "You think you can drag my name through the mud, Brian? You'll regret it. I'm just asking for receipts," I said evenly. "If you've got nothing to hide, there shouldn't be a problem." "I don't owe you anything," she shouted before hanging up. 2 hours later, I received a notice in my mailbox, a fine from the HOA for disruptive behavior and community defamation. It was for $1,500. Classic Karen move. That night, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited, but Greg texted me updates from inside. "She's panicking," he wrote, yelling about internal traitors, trying to convince the board to vote you off the community dock registry. "Let her try," I replied. "Every word she says is evidence." By Friday, the situation had escalated. Karen filed a formal complaint with the county assessor's office, claiming that I had built my dock illegally. She attached decades-old photos and fake measurements to make it look like I'd expanded my property line. Fortunately, the county clerk, an old friend of mine named Linda, called me directly. "Brian, I've known you for 20 years. I've seen your permits, but your HOA president just sent me a 20-page complaint accusing you of coastal encroachment and illegal property use. She's serious." "Let her dig her own grave," I said. "I've got proof." Linda laughed softly. "You might want to get ready for something bigger. When I checked their file, I noticed your HOA hasn't filed any annual audits in 3 years. That's a federal compliance issue." That's when I realized I wasn't the one under investigation anymore she was about to be. The following Monday, David and I filed a formal whistleblower report with the State Financial Bureau. We attached every document, fraudulent invoices, missing audits, the suspicious grant trail, and witness statements from Greg and the maintenance crew. Within days, an investigator named Agent Laura Jensen reached out to me. Calm, professional, but direct. "Mr. Thompson, your report matches several complaints we've received from nearby neighborhoods," she said. "There's a pattern of HOAs misappropriating city funds. Your case might be the key." I met her 2 days later at a lakeside cafe. Laura wore plain clothes, but she carried herself like someone who'd been through a dozen corruption cases. She slid a folder across the table. "We've been monitoring Blue Harbor Services for 6 months. It's a shell company. Money flows in from multiple HOAs, then disappears offshore. The registered address leads to a storage unit." My heart pounded. "So Karen's part of a larger operation. That's what we're trying to confirm," she said. "We need you to cooperate quietly. Keep collecting documents. Don't confront her again. Let her think you back down." I nodded. "Consider it done." So I played along. At the next HOA event, a community dock cleanup day, I showed up like nothing had happened. Karen acted smug, all smiles for the camera crew from the local paper she'd invited. "Glad you decided to be a team player again, Brian," she said sweetly, holding out a pair of gloves. I smiled back. "Just trying to do my part, Madam President." Behind that fake friendliness, I could see her eyes dart nervously toward her assistant, whispering about paperwork and moving files. That night, Greg texted me again. They're shredding documents at the clubhouse. I saw Karen hauling boxes into her car. I immediately called Agent Jensen. Within hours, her team got a court order to preserve HOA financial records. The next morning, 2 county officers arrived at the clubhouse to serve the order. Karen tried to stop them at the door. "You can't come in here without." One of them held up the warrant. "Ma'am, this is signed by a judge." They took every file, every laptop, and every hard drive. Karen was livid. She marched straight to my driveway later that afternoon. "You did this," she shouted. "You think you can humiliate me in front of everyone? You're finished, Brian." I folded my arms. "You called 911 on me for selling my own yacht, Olivia. Turns out you were the one breaking federal law." Her face went pale. You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I think I do," I said quietly. "And so does the State Financial Bureau." She stormed off, but for the first time since I'd known her, she didn't have a comeback. A few days later, I got another visit, this time from FBI agent Cooper, who was coordinating with the Financial Crimes Division. "Mr. Thompson," he said, flipping through his notes, "thank you for cooperating. You've done the right thing. We've found irregular transactions tied to multiple bank accounts. This HOA might be laundering money for a network of fake contractors." He smiled slightly. "You're about to see something interesting very soon." I leaned against my truck watching the calm ripples of the lake. The same lake where Karen once screamed at me about community property. Funny how quiet it felt now. I could almost hear the faint sound of justice approaching, like the steady hum of a distant engine cutting through smooth water. Whatever storm was coming next, I was ready for it. The first official sign that things were about to get serious came on a gray Thursday morning. I was sipping coffee on my porch when 3 black SUVs rolled slowly down the lakefront road, stopping in front of the HOA clubhouse. Even from a distance, I could see the gold FBI lettering gleaming on their jackets. A half hour later, the entire community group chat was exploding with messages. Is the HOA being raided? What's happening at the clubhouse? Did Karen finally get caught? By the time I walked down to the dock, half the neighborhood had gathered behind the yellow police tape. Karen stood near her car in full panic mode mascara, running hair wild, shouting at an agent who didn't even glance at her. "Excuse me, I'm the HOA president. You can't just storm into my office like this." The agent simply handed her a copy of the warrant. "Ma'am, you're not under arrest. Yet. But you'll need to stay available for questioning." Her eyes flicked toward me across the crowd. The look she gave me could have peeled paint. I raised my coffee cup slightly and gave her a calm nod. That only made her angrier. The FBI spent hours combing through the clubhouse. By noon, they had hauled out 6 boxes of files, 2 laptops, and an entire desktop computer. The community stood in silence as the agents loaded the evidence into their SUVs. Karen tried to regain control. "Everyone, please. This is just a misunderstanding," she said, her voice trembling. "There's been a clerical error in the financial reports. I'll sort this out by tomorrow," but no one believed her anymore. "A neighbor misses," Dawson muttered under her breath. "A clerical error worth $1 million. Even Greg couldn't resist." "Yeah, Karen, next time maybe balance your books before buying a second vacation home." The crowd chuckled nervously. Karen glared at him but didn't respond. She looked smaller somehow. Not in stature, but in presence. For years, she'd towered over everyone, barking orders, enforcing fines, sending passive-aggressive emails about mailbox paint colors. But now she was cornered, and the cracks were finally showing. Later that evening, I got a call from Agent Jensen. "Brian just wanted to let you know," she said, "the evidence you provided was key. We've found offshore transfers linked to Karen's husband's company. There's enough to trigger a full-scale federal audit." I exhaled slowly. "So this is really happening?" "It's happening," she confirmed. "But keep your head down. People like her don't go quietly." I thanked her and hung up. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to relax, but only slightly. Because if I'd learned anything dealing with Karen, it was that she always had one last card to play. Sure enough, that card came the next morning. A glossy newsletter appeared in every mailbox in the community. On the front page was a photo of Karen smiling confidently, captioned, "HOA President addresses recent misunderstandings, false allegations by bitter neighbor debunked." Inside the article was pure fiction. She claimed the raid was part of a routine record inspection, that I had fabricated documents out of jealousy, and that I was facing civil penalties for defamation. The boldest line read, "Mr. Brian Thompson has been harassing HOA staff and spreading misinformation to discredit the board's leadership." I almost laughed. Her desperation was practically dripping off the page. But some neighbors still weren't sure what to believe. HOA drama had a way of confusing people. I knew I needed something undeniable. So that weekend, I hosted what I called a community transparency night. I set up a projector in my driveway, invited every resident, and offered free pizza and cold drinks. Dozens showed up, partly out of curiosity, partly because nobody wanted to miss the next episode of the neighborhood soap opera. When everyone settled in, I stepped forward with a calm smile. "Thanks for coming," I began. "I'm not here to sling accusations. I'm here to show you facts." Then I clicked play. On the screen appeared scans of HOA checks made out to Blue Harbor Services, each signed by Karen. Then came bank statements showing transfers into offshore accounts. Then finally, an internal email where Karen instructed her assistant to move the remaining grant funds before the audit. The crowd gasped audibly. Someone shouted, "Oh my God, she really did it." Karen wasn't there, but I could imagine her face turning red as her little empire burned. By the end of the presentation, even the most skeptical neighbors were convinced. Greg stood up and said loudly, "I motion that the current HOA board be suspended pending investigation." Dozens of voices echoed, seconded, we voted right there on the spot. Unanimous. Karen was officially out. But the chaos wasn't over. The next morning, I received another anonymous email. This time it wasn't a warning, it was evidence. Attached was a PDF containing contractual correspondence between Karen and a city official named Howard Briggs, who had approved the original grant. The messages made it clear Karen had promised Briggs a consulting fee in exchange for overlooking the missing renovation receipts. Bribery. Clear as day. I forwarded everything to Agent Jensen. Her reply came almost instantly. "You've just connected the dots. Expect action soon." And soon came faster than anyone expected. 2 days later, the entire neighborhood woke up to a sight none of us would forget. Multiple SUVs, unmarked sedans, and a white van filled the street. Agents swarmed Karen's home. Reporters arrived minutes later, cameras rolling. From my porch, I watched as Karen was led out in handcuffs, screaming at the top of her lungs. "You don't understand, I'm innocent. He set me up, he's behind all of this." The agents barely acknowledged her as they read her rights. Greg leaned over the fence beside me. "Well," he said, smirking, "guess she finally got her 15 minutes of fame." I chuckled. She always did want the spotlight. The neighborhood erupted in murmurs and laughter. For the first time in a long time, the air felt lighter, like the lake breeze had finally carried away years of tension and control. Over the next week, news spread quickly. Local headlines screamed HOA president arrested in $1.2 million fraud and bribery scheme. Federal agents investigate embezzlement tied to waterfront grant. The story went viral. HOA reform groups online began sharing it as a case study in community corruption. My phone rang nonstop, journalists, lawyers, even other HOA whistleblowers wanting advice. The best part, the yacht buyer who'd backed out earlier reached back out. "Looks like your name's been cleared," he said. "Still want to sell," I grinned. "You bet." The deal went through that Friday. When the wire transfer hit my account, it felt poetic. The very transaction Karen had tried to ruin became the symbol of her downfall. That night I walked down to the dock one last time before the yacht was picked up. The water reflected the soft glow of the moon. The FBI tape still fluttered faintly near the clubhouse. I thought about how it all started. A simple sale twisted by ego and greed into something far larger. Then I heard a voice behind me. "Agent Jensen." "Thought I'd stop by before we close the file," she said with a small smile. "You did good, Brian. Not many people stand up to HOA corruption like that." I nodded. "Just wanted my piece back." She handed me a manila envelope. "Inside's your official exoneration letter. Also, a thank you note from the Bureau." I raised an eyebrow. "They do that now," she chuckled. "Only for the ones who help us bust million-dollar embezzlement rings." We stood in silence for a moment, listening to the water lap against the dock. "Funny thing," she added, "we're still finding money trails tied to other HOAs. Looks like your community wasn't the only one involved." I frowned. "You mean there are more Karens out there?" "Oh, plenty," she said. "But at least now people know what to look for." She turned to leave, then paused. "By the way, that yacht name of yours, Justice Right, yeah." She smiled. Fitting. As her car disappeared into the night, I looked out over the lake again. The water shimmered peaceful and calm as if nothing had ever happened. But I knew better. Sometimes peace doesn't come from silence, it comes from finally being heard. The morning after Karen's arrest, I thought the storm was over. The neighborhood was buzzing with gossip, the HOA website had been taken offline, and reporters were camped out by the community entrance like vultures waiting for another headline. I figured things would quiet down once the dust settled. I was wrong. At exactly 9:14 a.m., I heard the low hum of engines approaching, deep, synchronized, powerful. When I stepped outside, I counted 6 black SUVs, rolling in, followed by a white van marked IRS, Criminal Investigation Division. Behind them, 2 county sheriff cars and an unmarked vehicle with tinted windows. I'd seen enough movies to know what this meant. The feds were back. Karen had already been arrested, but apparently her empire wasn't limited to herself. There were whispers that several board members and even a local city inspector might be involved. Within minutes, the convoy stopped right in front of the HOA clubhouse. Agents poured out dressed in dark tactical vests with bright yellow lettering. They moved quickly, no hesitation, no wasted words. One agent carried a crowbar. Another rolled a cart full of evidence boxes. From my porch, I could see a crowd forming. Neighbors emerged from their driveways with coffee mugs in hand, pretending to walk their dogs just to get a better view. And right there, in the middle of the chaos, stood Daniel Whitmore, Karen's husband. He must have thought he could talk his way out of this. Dressed in his usual pastel polo and gold watch, he puffed out his chest and waved at the agents like they were delivery men who'd shown up at the wrong address. "Excuse me," he shouted. "This is private property. You can't just—" An agent cut him off, holding up a document in a plastic sleeve. "Search warrant, signed by a federal judge." "Step aside, sir." Daniel's face drained of color. "Search warrant for what?" The agent's reply was calm but sharp. Embezzlement, wire fraud, and misuse of federal funds. That did it. He froze, mouth slightly open, and slowly stepped back. By 9:30, the agents had broken into the clubhouse's locked back office, the one Karen always called her administrative suite. It was there they found hard drives, hidden cash boxes, and a folder labeled Project Marina Expansion. The agents hauled everything out and began taking photos of the property. I overheard one of them on the radio mention multiple bank transfers traced to foreign accounts. Looks like the full operation ran through HOA payrolls statewide. I couldn't believe it. Karen wasn't just corrupt, she was part of a larger money laundering ring using HOA budgets across the county to move stolen grant funds. As the agents worked, residents whispered among themselves. "Did you see how calm he is?" one woman murmured, nodding toward me. Greg grinned. "Brian's been 10 steps ahead of them this whole time." I didn't respond. I was still processing what I was seeing. The community that once fined me for having my mailbox painted the wrong shade of beige was now a crime scene. At around 10:00 a.m., 2 agents walked up my driveway. "Mr. Thompson," one said politely. "I'm Agent Cooper, we spoke before. This is Agent Riley from the IRS." I nodded. "You guys are early." He smiled faintly. "Let's just say we've been eager for this one. You might want to see what we found." They led me to the back office of the clubhouse. The door had been forced open, revealing a room I'd never seen before. Sleek desk, locked cabinets, dual monitors still glowing. It looked more like a corporate command center than a neighborhood HOA office. Riley pointed to a screen showing rows of transactions. "These are payments from 10 different HOAs, all funneled into Blue Harbor Services and Lakeside Property Consulting. Same pattern every month for 3 years. Total $4.3 million. My eyes widened. $4 million. From HOAs, Cooper nodded. "Yep, each payment small enough to avoid audits. Add in fake invoices, fake signatures, and you've got a perfect laundering loop. Your HOA was the largest contributor, which makes you our key witness." I let out a low whistle. So Karen wasn't just stealing, she was the tip of an iceberg. "Exactly," Cooper said. "And thanks to your documents, we've got the proof." Around noon, the calm of the operation shattered when Daniel tried to run. He jumped into his white Mercedes SUV, slammed it into reverse, and gunned it toward the exit. Tires screeched, residents screamed. For a split second, I thought he might actually make it past the patrol cars. But then, wham, 2 sheriff vehicles boxed him in. Agents swarmed shouting, "Hands up." Out of the vehicle, Daniel stumbled out shouting, "I didn't do anything. It was all her idea." One agent said dryly, "You can tell that to the judge. They cuffed him right there in the middle of Clearwater Drive while half the neighborhood filmed with their phones. I swear I saw one teenager doing a TikTok dance in the background while Daniel was being arrested. It was poetic in the most ridiculous way possible. By late afternoon, the entire HOA board was under investigation. Agents loaded box after box of evidence into vans. A local news crew arrived, interviewing anyone willing to talk. Greg, of course, volunteered. "Yeah, I always knew something was off," he said to the camera. "Karen once fined me for parking too close to the curb. Turns out she was stealing millions." Go figure. The reporter then turned the microphone toward me. "Mr. Thompson, as the homeowner who initially reported these irregularities, how does it feel to see this unfold?" I hesitated for a moment, glancing toward the lake where sunlight danced on the ripples. "Well," I said slowly, "I didn't expect justice to arrive with flashing lights and FBI jackets, but I'll take it." The crowd chuckled. That quote ended up being the headline for the evening news. That night, I couldn't sleep. Even though the raid was over, my mind kept replaying the chaos, the shouting, the flashing lights, the surreal image of my once peaceful neighborhood turned into a federal operation zone. I walked down to the dock around midnight. The air was cool, the lake calm. For the first time in weeks, the water felt peaceful again. Then out of nowhere, a figure appeared, Agent Jensen. "Can't sleep either?" she asked, softly walking over. I smiled faintly. Too much adrenaline, I guess. She stood beside me, hands in her pockets. "You should know this case will make headlines for a while. Karen and her husband are facing multiple charges, fraud, bribery, racketeering. But it doesn't end here." I turned to her. "What do you mean?" "There are connections between their shell companies and 2 other HOAs, one in Tampa, one in Tallahassee. Same signatures, same accounts. We think it's an organized ring of property managers skimming grant funds." I exhaled. "So this was never just about a yacht sale?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "But your report cracked the first link. Without you, this would have stayed buried." We stood there in silence for a while, listening to the gentle waves lap against the pier. You know, she added with a smirk, you could have just ignored her, let her call 911 and laugh it off. Oh, I tried, I said with a chuckle. But Karen doesn't stop until you stop her. Jensen smiled. Well, consider her stopped. The next morning I received a neatly typed letter from the U.S. Attorney's Office thanking me for my cooperation. It also included confirmation that my property, the dock and adjoining land, were officially cleared of all claims. I pinned the letter to my office wall right above my yacht photo. Below it, I scribbled a simple note: when someone calls 911 on you, make sure justice calls them back. The story of Clearwater Estates was far from over, but for the first time I could finally breathe. And as I watched the sunrise glimmer across the still water, I knew the best part was yet to come. Because the real reckoning hadn't even started. The days following the raid were some of the strangest of my life. For years, Clearwater Estates had been a quiet, postcard-perfect lakeside neighborhood where the biggest controversies were over lawn heights and mailbox colors. Now it looked like a crime scene from a Netflix docuseries. Yellow tape fluttered near the clubhouse. The news vans were still parked by the gate, and every resident suddenly acted like a federal law expert. The HOA's official email account was seized, the website taken offline, and all board members suspended pending investigation. Without Karen and her cronies running the show, the place felt weirdly peaceful. No fines. No passive-aggressive letters. No compliance notices. Just quiet. But not everyone was celebrating. One afternoon, I was walking my dog by the lake when Mrs. Whitmore's sister, a nervous-looking woman named Elaine, stopped her car beside me. She rolled down her window eyes, darting nervously. "Brian," she said softly, "you don't understand what you've done." I frowned. "Elaine, your sister stole over $1 million. The FBI understands perfectly well." She shook her head. "You think she did this alone? Karen was taking orders from people way above her, people who don't want their names in court filings. Then maybe they shouldn't have funded fake renovations," I replied. Elaine's expression turned grave. "Just be careful." She wasn't the mastermind, only the face of it. Then she drove off without another word. Her warning stayed in my head all night. The next week, the full weight of the federal investigation dropped. Karen was charged with embezzlement fraud and obstruction of justice. Her husband Daniel faced conspiracy charges. Their assets were frozen, their lakefront mansion sealed. It was surreal seeing her mugshot on the evening news, the same woman who used to lecture us about community integrity, now wearing an orange jumpsuit, hair disheveled, eyes wide and hollow. But what shocked everyone more was what came next. The FBI's official press release revealed that at least 4 other HOAs across the state were implicated in the same money laundering network, all using identical shell companies, all receiving the same infrastructure improvement grants. Clearwater Estates was just the beginning. The headlines exploded. Florida HOA corruption scandal widens, multi-million-dollar laundering scheme exposed. Residents outraged as federal investigation targets HOA board members statewide. Neighbors who once worshipped Karen as a protector of property values now refused to say her name. Some even deleted old photos with her from Facebook. As for me, I suddenly found myself at the center of attention. Local reporters called me the whistleblower homeowner. HOA reform blogs dubbed me the man who sank the HOA queen. I won't lie, I got a kick out of it. But fame brings its own problems. A few days later, someone vandalized my mailbox. A spray-painted message in red letters, "Snitch." I stood there for a long moment just staring. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same mailbox, Karen fined me for painting the wrong beige tone, was now covered in graffiti because I exposed her crimes. I called the sheriff's office, and Deputy Barnes, the same officer who'd first responded when Karen called 911 over my yacht, showed up. He looked at the mailbox, then at me, and chuckled. "Man, you just can't catch a break, huh? I guess being right doesn't always make you popular," I said. He scribbled a quick report, then added, "For what it's worth, the department's rooting for you. That woman made our lives miserable, too. Filed police complaints every other week over noise and ducks." "Ducks," I repeated, raising an eyebrow. He nodded seriously. Said they were trespassing on HOA property. We both burst out laughing. That was the first real laugh I'd had in months. By mid-March, the FBI wrapped up their on-site investigation, but the story kept evolving. They discovered offshore accounts in Belize shell companies in Delaware, and even connections to a construction firm in Georgia that hadn't existed since 2017. Every day brought a new revelation. Karen had faked repair bids, forged signatures, and used HOA funds to pay off her credit cards and fund a secret investment account. But she hadn't acted alone. 2 city employees and a financial consultant were also arrested. Apparently, when the city approved the $1.2 million dock grant, 40% of it was redirected into a slush fund that Karen and her partners split under the guise of administrative fees. It was a spiderweb of corruption, and somehow it all started because she didn't want me selling my yacht. Life's funny that way. When the dust settled, the county temporarily dissolved the Clearwater Estates HOA and appointed an interim oversight board. To my complete surprise, I was nominated as acting chair until new elections could be held. At first, I hesitated. The last thing I wanted was to turn into another Karen, but then Greg convinced me. "Come on, Brian," he said over a beer. "You already fought the dragon. Might as well guard the treasure now." I laughed. "Guard the treasure, huh?" He grinned. "Exactly. You know this community better than anyone, and you actually care. We need someone who won't fine people for having flower pots." So reluctantly, I accepted. My first act as interim chair was simple transparency. We opened every file, published every financial record, and held open meetings in the park instead of the clubhouse. Residents could finally see where their money went. The mood changed overnight. People smiled again. Kids rode bikes down the streets without Karen's ridiculous no unsupervised play after 6 p.m. rule. We planted community gardens. Someone even organized a weekend BBQ, the first one in years, without a complaint letter about smoke violations. For the first time, Clearwater Estates felt like a community again, not a dictatorship. One evening after a long meeting, I walked down to the dock. The sunset painted the water orange and gold. For months, this spot had been a battleground. Now it was peaceful again. A small box sat near the railing with a note taped to it. "For Brian, thank you for saving our neighborhood." Inside was a hand-carved miniature yacht with the word justice painted on the side. I smiled. But peace doesn't last long when you've just taken down $1 million criminal network. A week later, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single flash drive and a short note written in block letters. "You didn't uncover everything. Look deeper into the grant files. No signature, no clue who sent it." I plugged it into my laptop cautiously. Inside were scanned documents, internal city memos, budget revisions, and email threads between officials. One name stood out immediately: Howard Briggs. He was the city's infrastructure director, the same man who'd approved the HOA grants. Attached was a message from him to Karen dated 2 years ago. "Keep the paperwork tight this time. Last transfer raised red flags. You'll get your cut once the state clears the inspection." My stomach dropped. Elaine had been right. Karen wasn't the mastermind, just a pawn. If Briggs was involved, that meant the corruption reached far beyond Clearwater Estates. I copied the files and immediately called Agent Jensen. "Brian," she said after scanning the documents, "this changes everything. Briggs oversees funding for 22 HOAs. If he's dirty, this could turn into one of the biggest municipal fraud cases in Florida history." "So what happens now?" I asked. "We dig deeper," she said. "And you, my friend, might be needed again." I sighed, looking out the window toward the shimmering lake. Just when I thought the story was over, another storm was brewing on the horizon. But this time I wasn't scared. Because I'd already learned something Karen never did: when you stand on the side of truth, the water always reflects it back. 3 months had passed since the raid, and Clearwater Estates was slowly finding its rhythm again. The FBI vans were gone, the news trucks had stopped circling, and for the first time in years, the sound of laughter replaced the tense silence that had once hung over the lake. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the ghosts of the past lingered not just in paperwork and bank ledgers, but in the trust we'd lost as neighbors. You can't rebuild a community overnight after it's been ruled by fear, greed, and pink memos threatening $500 fines for trash can visibility. That was why, as the interim HOA chair, I made my mission simple: transparency, unity, and peace. We started small. The first community meeting under my leadership wasn't held in the echoing, pretentious clubhouse Karen used to command from her polished oak podium. Instead, we met outdoors by the lake under a wide white tent with folding chairs and a cooler full of lemonade. No suits, no clipboards, no speeches, just people. I began with a simple statement: no one here owes anyone an apology for believing the wrong person. What matters is what we do next. Greg raised his hand. "So, no more fines for flower pots." The crowd burst out laughing. "Not unless your flower pot starts violating federal law," I replied. The tension broke. People smiled again. It was the first genuine laughter Clearwater had heard in years. Over the following weeks, we rebuilt everything Karen had twisted. First, we abolished the old fine system. No more absurd citations for Christmas lights or non-regulation mulch color. Instead, we adopted a community service system. If someone broke a minor rule, they'd help with maintenance or events instead of paying cash. Second, we reopened the HOA finances to everyone. I hired an independent accountant, and we posted monthly reports on a bulletin board by the lake for everyone to see. No secrets, no shell games. And finally, we held a Clearwater Restoration Day. Over 80 residents showed up to clean the docks, plant new trees, and repaint the community fence. Even kids came with paint rollers bigger than their arms. Greg grilled burgers, Mrs. Dawson brought pies, and for the first time the lake reflected laughter instead of conflict. As the sun set, I stood near the dock watching families splash water and toast marshmallows by fire pits. It was hard to believe this was the same place that had once been the center of an FBI investigation. "Feels different, doesn't it?" Greg said, walking up beside me with 2 beers. "Yeah," I said, smiling. "Like we're finally breathing again." He raised his bottle. "To freedom from tyranny." We clinked bottles and laughed. But not everything was fixed so easily. A week later, I got an unexpected visit at my house. A black sedan pulled into my driveway, unmarked but definitely government-issued. Agent Jensen stepped out wearing a crisp blue blazer and her usual unreadable smile. "Agent," I said, opening the door, "don't tell me you're here about another HOA scandal." She chuckled. "Not exactly. But remember that flash drive you sent with Howard Briggs's emails?" "Yeah." The city official who greenlit the fake dock grants. Her expression turned serious. "He's been indicted. Turns out Briggs was running a statewide kickback operation. He funneled millions through fake infrastructure projects. Your HOA was the only one that blew the whistle before it was too late." I let out a long breath. "So, it's really over now," almost, she said. "But the U.S. attorney wants your testimony. They're filing charges against 4 more officials. We'll need you as a witness in the main trial." Me, she nodded. "You're the reason the dominoes fell. You started the investigation. Without your documentation, this case would still be buried under red tape." I rubbed the back of my neck. "You make it sound like I'm some kind of hero." She smiled faintly. "Maybe not a hero, just a guy who refused to look the other way." The trial took place 6 months later in downtown Tampa. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Karen Daniel and 4 city officials were brought in, each in matching gray suits that did little to hide their anxiety. When I took the stand, I told the story exactly as it happened: the false 911 call, the accusations, the missing money, the fake companies. Every detail, every document, every lie she told. Karen stared at me the entire time. There was no anger in her eyes now, no arrogance, just exhaustion. When our eyes met for a brief second, she looked like a person who finally realized she'd built her kingdom on sand. Her lawyer tried to twist my words, but the evidence was overwhelming. The offshore transfers, the fake invoices, the bribery chain, all connected back to her and Briggs. After 2 weeks, the verdict came down guilty on all counts. Karen was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Her husband got 5. Briggs and the other officials faced between 10 and 12. When the judge finished reading the verdict, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. It wasn't triumph, more like closure. After all, I hadn't set out to destroy anyone. I just wanted to live in peace. By the time the dust settled, the community had fully transformed. We held elections for a permanent HOA board, and to my surprise, the residents voted to keep me as president. I tried to decline, but they insisted. "Brian," Mrs. Dawson said, "for the first time people trust the HOA. That's because of you." So I stayed. But I promised myself I'd never let power twist me the way it twisted Karen. I focused on rebuilding what mattered most: trust. We launched a community scholarship fund using the restitution money recovered from the fraud case. We installed solar lights on the docks, renovated the clubhouse, and even built a small playground near the water. The highlight of the year came in the summer when we hosted the Clearwater Freedom Festival. It was everything Karen hated: loud music, kids running barefoot, barbecue smoke drifting across the lake. At sunset, as fireworks sparkled above the water, I unveiled a new plaque near the dock. In memory of the Clearwater investigation, a reminder that truth floats no matter how deep you try to sink it. The crowd clapped and cheered. Greg nudged me. "You sure you don't want to run for mayor next?" "Not a chance," I laughed. "I've dealt with enough politics to last a lifetime." Later that night, after everyone went home, I sat alone by the lake. The water reflected the soft lights of the docks, clean, repaired, beautiful again. My new yacht, a modest, 32-foot vessel I'd named Justice II, bobbed gently against the ropes. For the first time in a long while, everything was quiet. I thought about Karen, where she was now sitting in a cold federal cell, probably still blaming everyone but herself. And I thought about the irony: she called 911 to destroy me, and that call had ended up destroying her empire instead. Sometimes life doesn't give you instant revenge, it gives you poetic justice. As the moonlight shimmered across the lake, I smiled. Clearwater was whole again, and so was I. But deep down I knew the story wasn't entirely over, because a week later I received another anonymous letter. No threats, no warnings, just a single sentence. There are still more names on the list. I folded the note and looked out at the peaceful water. Maybe it was a new beginning, or maybe it was the start of another storm. Either way, I was ready. Because once you've faced down an HOA president and the FBI in the same year, there's not much left in the world that can scare you. I thought that anonymous note was a prank at first, probably some bored neighbor trying to stir up new gossip now that the drama had died down. But something about it kept gnawing at me. There are still more names on the list. What list? The next morning I poured myself a cup of coffee and stared out at the lake. Everything looked calm, mirror-smooth waterbirds, skimming the surface sunlight glinting off the new dock rails we'd installed. Clearwater Estates had finally found peace. But peace, I'd learned, can be a mask. I went to my office, opened the drawer where I kept all the old case files, and pulled out the flash drive the FBI had returned after the trial. I'd promised myself I'd never plug it in again, but curiosity always wins. Inside was a folder labeled City Contracts, 2021. Most of it was harmless bureaucratic, junk spreadsheets, invoices, dull PDF scans. But buried deep was a subfolder marked Pending. And that's where I saw it, a document I'd never noticed before. Project Marina Expansion, Phase 2. Approved funding, $3,000,000. Contractor Blue Harbor Services, LLC, co-signed by Howard Briggs. Secondary signatory Councilwoman Lydia Barrett. My stomach tightened. Lydia Barrett. I knew that name. She was a county councilwoman, the same official who'd stood on stage at the press conference, congratulating the FBI for their swift justice in cleaning up HOA corruption. She'd called me a model citizen in her speech. And yet, there she was, co-signing the next phase of the same fraudulent project. I immediately called Agent Jensen. Laura, I said, I think the case isn't over. You need to see something. She sighed. Brian, we've been over this. Karen's in prison. Briggs is awaiting sentencing. It's done. Then why, I said, forwarding the document, does your Phase 2 project list a sitting councilwoman signing off on a fake company you already proved doesn't exist? There was a pause. Then a sharp inhale. Send me everything you have, she said quickly. By the following afternoon, she was back at my doorstep. No smile this time, just focus. She handed me a folder. You were right, she said quietly. The council approved a new infrastructure budget just weeks ago. $3 million earmarked for marina restoration projects. Blue Harbor was re-registered under a new EIN, same owner under a different alias. Let me guess, Briggs. His cousin, she said grimly. This isn't over. The network's rebuilding itself under new names. I leaned back in my chair. Unbelievable. They really don't quit, do they? Corruption never does, she said. It just changes uniforms. That night, I sat outside by the lake again, staring at the faint reflection of stars in the dark water. I thought about everything that had happened, the lies, the raids, the arrests, how a simple yacht sale had uncovered a multi-million-dollar criminal ring, and yet the rot still ran deeper. I'd always thought the worst evil came from greed. But now I realized it came from people who convinced themselves that nobody would ever notice. But I had noticed, and I wasn't done. The next morning, I met with Greg at the local diner. I slid the printout across the table. He squinted at it mid-bite of pancakes. You're kidding me. Lydia Barrett. She was shaking your hand at the festival last month. I know, I said. She smiled, thanked me for saving the community, and meanwhile she was already signing the next scam. Greg whistled. So what's your move now? Another round with the feds, I nodded. Jensen's taking it up the ladder, but I'm not sitting out this time. If Barrett's dirty, the public deserves to know before she buries it under paperwork. Within a week, the local paper published an exposé titled Councilwoman Linked to Second Wave of HOA Grant Fraud. The story blew up faster than I expected. Reporters camped outside City Hall. Barrett denied everything on live TV, calling it a baseless conspiracy from a disgruntled homeowner. Yeah, that homeowner was me. But her denial didn't last long. 2 days later, another whistleblower, a clerk from the city's finance office, came forward, confirming she'd been instructed to backdate documents for the same project. The dominoes began to fall again. Barrett's office was raided. Emails surfaced showing direct communication with Briggs before his arrest, proof she'd tried to resurrect his company to continue laundering funds through the new grants. Jensen called me that night. Brian, congratulations. You just helped bring down a sitting council member. I laughed. I'm not sure whether to feel proud or exhausted. Both, she said. You're becoming a legend in our office, you know that. Don't start that, I chuckled. I'm just a guy who wanted to sell a yacht. The fallout was enormous. The mayor held a press conference promising sweeping reform of HOA oversight laws. Federal investigators expanded their probe statewide. And once again, Clearwater Estates found itself on the evening news, this time not as the scandal's epicenter, but as the example of integrity. Neighbors knocked on my door just to say thank you. Some brought cookies, others handwritten notes. One even said, "You should write a book." But honestly, I didn't want fame. I wanted quiet. So I took my boat, Justice II, out onto the lake one early morning. The mist hung low, the water glassy smooth. For a long time, I just drifted listening to the hum of the motor and the whisper of wind against the sails. I thought about everything Karen had cost me: stress time, sleepless nights, but also what she'd given me: perspective. Before all this, I'd thought life was about comfort. A quiet home, a good boat, steady peace. But now I knew the truth. Peace means nothing if it's built on corruption. Sometimes you have to tear everything down before you can rebuild it right. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the lake gold, I hosted one last meeting at the dock. We'd gathered to rename the community officially. The residents had voted to retire the name Clearwater Estates, too tainted by scandal. When the time came, I unveiled the new sign carved from reclaimed oak: Clearwater Haven, founded on truth. The crowd applauded. I could see tears in some eyes. Today, I said, we close the book on the past, not by forgetting it, but by learning from it. We all lived through something ugly, but out of that ugliness, we built something honest. Then I paused and smiled. And for anyone out there thinking of running another scam on this lake, just remember the last HOA president who tried, that's still serving 8 years in federal prison. The crowd erupted in laughter. Later that night, I sat on my porch with a whiskey glass in hand, watching the reflection of the new sign shimmer on the water. My phone buzzed a text from Agent Jensen. Case closed. For real this time. Drinks on me next time you're in Tampa. I typed back, deal. But make it on a yacht this time, she replied with a wink emoji. I set the phone down and took a slow sip of whiskey. The lake was calm again, the stars finally steady. Karen's 911 call, the one meant to destroy me, had become the thread that unraveled an entire system of corruption. It felt poetic, the kind of ending no scriptwriter could invent. And as the night deepened, I whispered to the quiet water below me, justice sails slow, but it always finds the shore. If there's one thing this journey taught me, it's that truth doesn't need to shout, it only needs to endure. Karen screamed louder than anyone, waving rules and threats like weapons. But in the end, her noise couldn't drown out the facts. I learned that integrity isn't about being perfect. It's about standing firm when everyone else looks away. It's about choosing what's right over what's easy, even when it means standing alone. So, if you ever find yourself cornered by power, remember every tyrant eventually faces their mirror. And sometimes that mirror comes in the form of one stubborn homeowner who refuses to back down. What would you do if your HOA president tried to control your life? Drop your answer in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories where truth wins in the end.